Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Elena and Professor Mahmood, for the opportunity to talk to you today. We're going to do three things. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the first major study which has brought healthcare and aviation together. Secondly, my good friend and colleague James Stevenson is going to talk about his experience as an airline pilot in how to create safe systems. And because James is a great speaker, I know there will be a lot of questions, and we'll have some time at the end for that. So before we start, the greatest cliche in medicine at the moment is to compare surgery with aviation. And that is not entirely true. That's because patients are not like airplanes. Airplanes are engineered, made to be maintained, and they have, on average, a lifespan of about 20 years. If airplanes looked like our patients, we'd be flying in one of those. But the similarity come out of complexity. We work in complex environments with complex technology, as do pilots, and we work with complex individuals. And I don't just mean nephrologists. And when things go wrong in a big way. It's normally on the front page of the newspapers, and people get in trouble. So there are similarities there. We know from this paper from the BMJ that medical error is now the third largest cause of death in the US. In fact, if you own a medical license, you're 8 times more likely to kill someone than if you own a gun. That doesn't mean we're bad doctors or bad nurses. It just means that we work in an environment that's error-prone, and we need to acknowledge that and learn how to mitigate it. Last year, 250,000 Americans died because of preventable medical harm. Compared to other industries, there were 2,000 deaths on the railroads and 33,000 deaths in car accidents. At the same time, in 2017, the American commercial aviation flew 840 million passengers, which is twice the population of the United States, with 0 fatalities. Now, we know that's only a matter of time until we have a hull loss and people will die. As an industry, the aviation industry recognizes that. Error is part of what we do. But you have to remember that 5 billion passengers have been flown since the last time somebody died in the US from an air accident. So what can we learn from them? The aviation industry hasn't always been safe. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, airline accidents were frequent, and we know that now that in countries where the safety culture in aviation isn't as strong as it is in the Western world, accidents are still very common. So we wanted to learn, how do you manage a crisis, aviation style? We did a prospective qualitative study over a period of 1.5 years, where we interviewed 17 senior airline training captains. These are sort of the professors of aviation. 4 different airlines, 2 in the US, 2 in the UK. We collected about 800 pages of transcripts. The population that we surveyed was extremely experienced. Their amassed flight time, not careers, flight time was 22 years spent in the air. That's equivalent to about 4,500 circumnavigations of the globe in a Boeing 747-400. And they had experience in over 29 different types of aircraft, both military and civilian. What did we learn? Well, many things. Mostly the fact that pilots love to eat and drink very well. But in addition to that, we found that in the same way that we have an airway breathing circulation pattern to dealing with physiological crises, they too have a system consistently. And this is called Aviate, Navigate, Communicate, ANC, or FNC, Fly, Navigate, Communicate, depending on whether you're an Airbus or a Boeing pilot. Boeing and Airbus, a bit like Evelina and Gosh. Same category, you know, so fighting it out. We spoke to them, we tried to realize, well, how does this translate into clinical practice? And we came up with a system called OMC, Operate, Move, Communicate. And I'm just going to give you a quick example of how this works. Now, how Aviate, Navigate, Communicate works is that it's a prioritization tool. It tells you what you have to do in an emergency, so you don't have to be analytical and professorial about it when bad things happen. Your number 1 priority is to keep the plane flying, correct speed, correct altitude, make sure you don't fall out of the sky, prevent the stall. The second point is to navigate, make sure the plane is pointing in the right direction and you don't fly it beautifully into a hill. And thirdly, make sure you communicate. Now, communicate doesn't mean you get on the radio and you start moaning about how unlucky you are. It's about creating help and getting help from the relevant individuals. And for this system to work, there have to be 2 additional steps. First of all, a crisis preparation phase, anticipating the crisis, and finally a crisis debrief, so you can learn from it. And this is what it looks like in real practice. Preparation involves two things: the long-term simulation and the short-term briefings. Pilots undergo mandatory crisis simulation every 6 months for about 8 hours. Over a 3-year cycle, they would have rehearsed every single crisis they are likely to encounter. If you fail it, you simply don't go back to flying. It's as simple as that. The equivalent of that in surgery would be that as a consultant in your 30-year career, you'd have to retake your FRCS 10 times. We simply don't have the same standards of training in crisis management. Secondly, it's about the team briefing. Now, we do team briefings with anaesthetists and surgeons and nurses in theatre. We do it well. We could do it better. I think sometimes we miss the point. In aviation, the purpose of a team brief is to set the tone, to allow people to speak up, to identify and anticipate threats, and then to be able to manage them. And finally, to be able to do checklists. Now, we are quite smug about checklists, but the problem is that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. We think that the single checklist that we do is the ultimate solution to safety. And the problem is that what we do is a normal checklist. That is to say, a checklist that makes sure we don't have errors. This is just the first chapter in safety. In aviation, they also have something called a non-normal checklist. That is to say, once you've had an error, what can you do to make sure that that error doesn't translate into harm? And furthermore, for those of you that are skeptical about checklists, we know there are times when there's just no time to do a checklist. And for that, the aviation industry has something called memory drills. That is to say, a simple checklist, 5 to 10 checklists, in your head that you have to be able to act on when things go really badly wrong, like engine failure on takeoff. There is no time to pull out the checklist. And again, we don't have memory drills for surgical emergencies. They actually practice these. Can you imagine what it would be like if you had to practice as a team conversion from laparoscopic to open surgery before you started a donor nephrectomy? You'd probably be escorted out of theatres. So it's a completely different culture. Secondly, it's about operate. That is to say, when you have a problem, you have to fix it. And of course, as a humble surgeon, you say, well, of course I'll fix it. Don't worry, I've got this. But the truth is, that doesn't work in real life. What the aviation industry has taught us is that when you are flying at 30,000 feet and there's smoke coming through the cockpit floor, or you have huge vibrations from an engine that's exploded, you will not behave in a rational way. You will not be cool and calm and confident. And what they do know is that when you are in a crisis, you become anxious, stressed, afraid. You will undergo a process of autonomic activation. You will lose your situational awareness. You will misinterpret data. You will make poor decisions. And eventually, you will lose your ability to behave in a social manner. The chimp, as they call it, will come out. So what do? Well, they undergo emotional resilience training. And pilots are taught how to control their emotions. The first thing to do is do nothing. Sit on your hands, count to 10. Take a deep breath and just hold back and revert back into a rational way of thinking. The way they do that is by introducing cognitive tools, such as plain path people. This is a mental trick that allows you to systematically and methodically deal with a problem in a way that allows you to turn chaos into order. And of course, we've tried to develop this for surgery. We have a tool called PARC, which stands for Physiology, Anatomy, Radiology, and Colleagues. Please don't tweet. So if I've just reperfused the kidney, please don't tweet. If the kidney's gone blue, then instead of shouting at the scrub nurse, infantilizing the junior doctor, being patronizing to the anesthetic colleague, what you should actually just do is turn around and say, okay, what's the physiology, guys? What's the blood pressure? How much fluid have we given? Have you started NORAD by any chance? Then go to the anatomy. What's the inflow to the kidney? Is the artery fine? Is the vein okay? That's the outflow. What's the parenchyma like? Is the kidney twisted? Go back to the radiology. Have I missed a plaque in the recipient vessels? Call radiology, get a scan on table. And finally realize that by the time you've done all that, you're probably tired, dehydrated, mortified that you're going to have to tell the mother of the child that you've messed up, and probably you're the last person who should be doing the operation. So call in a colleague and get help. The third step is to navigate. That is to say, move the patient to a place of safety. That obviously makes sense. Each environment has threats, and each environment has resources. And you have to move the patient to a place where you can minimize the threats and maximize the resources. Finally, you have to communicate. Communication is a tool not just for exchanging data, but actually it's for communicating your mental model, telling people what you're thinking, why you're thinking that, and actually remember that your job is to step back and manage the threats and errors. Finally, we have to remember that when we are under stress, we communicate badly. And then we wonder why people don't understand what we want. And as surgeons, we're highly guilty of that. We know that different tools for communication have been introduced in surgery, like S-bar from the military industry. Hands up if you've heard about S-bar. I personally think it's rubbish. It makes no sense. It's counterintuitive. By the time you work out what the letters mean, you've forgotten what you have to do, and you're not actually going to do it. I prefer this tool taken from the aviation industry called NITS. It stands for Nature of the Problem, My Intention, My Time Frame, and any specific precautions. So I would say the nature of the problem is I've got a blue kidney. My intention is to take it out. I'm going to do so in the next 5 minutes. Can you please prepare a benching trolley? Thank you. And then you get a read back from the person working with you to know that they've got the right message. And as you know, getting scrub stuff and anaesthetists to talk back to you, it's a challenge. The final step is to debrief. And of course, debrief is a little bit corny. It's another process. Why are we doing it? And actually, the point is that debriefing is about learning what went wrong so you don't have the same crisis again. It's about getting those lessons, entering into in the planning of the next work cycle, and making sure that you never see the same crisis twice. And unfortunately, in surgery, we can predict the next crisis. We know that the retractor is not going to work. We know that particular colleague fails in a very reproducible way, and yet we do nothing about it. And I think what James will do next is tell us how the aviation industry does that in a very effective way. So in summary, we've learned 5 things from our aviation colleagues. First of all, you have to prepare for crises, anticipate and expect the unexpected. Secondly, to fix a problem, you have to control yourself. Thirdly, you have to control your environment. Fourthly, you have to get your colleagues on board early, and all of them. Don't try to be smart. And finally, debrief to make sure you never have the same problem again. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's James. I've been in aviation training for 10 years now, and just want to really just follow up on what Peter's done. And Peter's been doing this a while, and I understand that sometimes a lot of pilots and medics talk together, and there's a lot of medics who fly light aircrafts and they're hobbyists and interested in it. Peter's not one of them. Peter's very well studied in this, and I've got nothing to add from what he's done already. So, spot on. Fantastic. So thank you very much for asking me to come today. And usually when I train, I have a much more interactive session. They're very kind that they sort of adjusted the timings a little bit so we can try and get some questions in, because that's really where the value is from these things. So what I'll do is a longer presentation. I'll try and cut it a little bit short. Is that all right? Can everyone hear me? Is that okay? Just speak really loud. So, I fly out of Gatwick Airport. I fly the A320 aircraft, which is 200 passengers in the back. We fly to over 100 destinations, different destination every day. Very complex operation. I just want to take the time, just before I start as well, to say what a huge amount of admiration I've got for everyone in the room. It humbles me to think about what you guys do. It's so important. You must hear it all the time, I know, but please just thank you for doing that. So, carrying on from what Peter's already said, I'm not going to draw any parallels or analogies today. I don't know anything about medicine, I certainly don't know anything about transportation, but what I'm hoping is that I can talk about aviation, and there might be something there, there might be something interesting, there might be an analogy somewhere. I also want to sort of let you know that environments do exist already that prioritise safety above all else. That this is not necessarily a dreamland to aspire to. There are just places where you can go on a nuclear submarine, on an oil rig, or in my case, in aviation, where lives are the only thing that matters. That's top of the list, and everything is directed towards that. I think it's necessary to talk about how that came about. Peter's just touched on that very slightly, so I'll just talk about that very quickly about how specifically in aviation we changed it, we turned a corner. And then I just want to sort of give you a very specific example of my career, what happened when you work in an environment that's free from recriminations, where your ability to speak up is encouraged, how that actually feeds back in. So, yeah. So this is just a nice slide here of the office, and pilot trainer. Just to say that I've worked for a number of different airlines in lots of different roles. Worked training BA, Canada's, Emirates, Flybe, Thomas Cook, Thomson Fly, EasyJet, a lot of different pilots at different forums. And right now I'm a multi-crew commercial pilot. Always work with someone next to me, and I also train as well. So it's important to note then that aviation was originally a military endeavour. It came out of the Second World War. The guys that were flying the aircraft were rigorously trained. You know, they were impeccably trained, and they were the best of the best. They actually were. And if you didn't listen to what this person was saying, you could literally be court-martialed for not doing it. So you can imagine that these people, they set what we call a very steep hierarchy. Now, in the 50s and 60s, when we first started flying commercially, accident rates were completely unacceptable. And people started to look at it and said, well, these people are extremely well trained. You know, we've the cream of the crop are the only ones here. So what's happening that we've got the best pilots out there and things are still going wrong? So I'd say this is where the seeds of the safety culture were sown. Instead of looking at, okay, obviously we want the best pilots, it was thinking, right, if we've got the best pilots and things aren't working, what are we going to do about it? So we started looking into why we were doing that. We were bolstering the system. We were making engineering improvements. We were making checklists. Yes, back in the 50s. Making checklists. And there was airspace redefinitions. There was lots of work done to improve the systems surrounding us. And despite all that, despite all those improvements, the accidents were still continuing. So we're still in the mind frame of wanting to autopsy, wanting to analyze every incident and implement a systematic change. But now we had to move beyond the systems to the people that were actually implementing them. So there have been many air disasters that we've learned about that have caused a real sea change. There's been specific moments where we've said, this happened here, we need to change this. I could talk all day about a whole number of them. I just want to very quickly, I've picked an accident in 1977 in Tenerife North. You may or may not know, but it was two 747s. The reason I picked it is the most deadly air crash of all time. More people died on this day in aviation than ever before. What they realized that on this day, it was the command style that was the problem. So if I just give you a very, very quick idea of what happened that day, very simply, very low visibility. We are relying as pilots on air traffic control to monitor the flow of the traffic on the runway. And on this particular day, there was a very, very impatient Dutch captain on a KLM. He was actually extremely well respected within his society, in his company, sorry. And he was literally the poster boy. You know, he was actually on the magazines and saying, you know, this is our best pilot. So there's a certain amount of ego involved with what he was doing. And on this particular day, they were taxiing out. They were in cloud. They can't see what's going on. And he's going, yeah, let's get going, let's get going. Of course, we've got the cockpit recordings of all this. And long story short, there was in front of him on the runway, there was another 747 that was crossing and moving to park. And he didn't know that at the time, of course. And he said, right, we're going, off we go. And the first officer, the guy sitting next to him, said, are you sure? You know, have we got clearance? And he's like, we're going. So a very clear incident of where, and this is borne out by lots of studies, by lots of investigations, that there's often one crew member that understood what was going on. Not necessarily the guy in charge. And often one crew member does it, sometimes voices it, sometimes not. Sometimes it's a case where, well, we've got the cockpit voice recordings and you can kind of see that someone's just saying, hang on a minute, something like that. And they're not voicing properly what's going on, but they're aware that there's something. So the idea is then that this makes this kind of accident preventable as long as I'm monitoring what I am doing. So the genuine weak link in this system is actually me. It's actually, the whole system's set up beautifully, and I'm the weak link at the end. So how does this make me feel? You know, should I be ashamed of what I'm doing? Should I be under the microscope for all the errors that I'm making? Does it make me think that pilots are perhaps a bit strange in the head, that they're the ones keep causing these problems? Maybe they're the wrong personality types. Maybe it makes me feel like I need to prove that I'm not a weakling. Maybe I need to feel like I need to show everyone that that's not the case. But in actual fact, that's exactly what doesn't happen in aviation. And the only reason that is the case is because of a safety culture. What it allows me to do is voice any concerns I have, either directly with a fellow pilot or within a safety management system, or to anyone I care to, without any fear of looking ignorant for my question and not knowing, or indeed overzealous for sort of getting involved, where perhaps people might see that's beyond my remit. I'm protected at my airline, and we generally airlines are, or at least most airlines will talk about a just culture. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. You probably have, but it does exist. I work within a system where my employees are not punished for any decisions taken, as long as it's commensurate with that it's taken in good faith, it's commensurate with their training experience. You can, and people do, and as I'm about to show you, I have done in the past, hold my hands up and go, okay, I did this wrong. You analyze it, you make sure that it was understood for yourself what happened, but more importantly, everybody else will learn from that. We disseminate that information very quickly. It's another protective process, effectively. It could be anonymous. I put it there as anonymous because I know it's a big thing, perhaps in medicine, about it being anonymous. Generally, we don't make it anonymous. You absolutely are allowed to in aviation, but we've sort of got to the stage where you want to talk about it with people, you want to show them what happened, you want to help them make sure that that doesn't occur again. It's professional-wide, across the whole profession, and it affects cross-cockpit communications. So as I said, I'm very lucky to be surrounded by these protective processes. And I realise as well that in what I do, there are huge safety margins compared to what you guys are doing. But it stands at me at the end, at the coalface, to protect those margins. And I'd be letting down the entire system. I'd be letting down absolutely everyone if I was at the end of it and allowing someone to operate just outside of it. And that's for the passengers, for the pilots as well. So what I wanted to do then, just very quickly, and I'll just brush through this. I thought it might be nice to get a little bit technical about flying, not much, but I just want you to have a look at the sort of thing from my experience. What I've got here is one of the airfield charts. You can see on the top, this is from Dalaman in Turkey. This is one of about 16, 17 charts we'd have a look at before we actually went in anywhere. Quite an important one to have a look at. Now, in this particular place, it's very important to have a look at because I'll just draw your attention to the red numbers. Like, for example, you can see an 11. That represents 11,900 feet. That's my minimum flight altitude. So if I'm landing at 20 feet, it's virtually sea level. I've got to be careful how I'm going to get this aircraft down, really. This would ring alarm bells with any pilot who is doing this, and you'd say, okay, right, there's some serious terrain to the north. What it means is that the approach to Dalaman is designed in such a way that you actually approach through a valley. So if you can see the topography higher over here, there's actually a gap down the valley just here. So for the purposes of this approach, we'd offset very slightly, offset by 15 degrees. When I say very slightly, it's the maximum you can offset. So it's not much, but it's the maximum we can do. And on this particular day, I was flying with someone who'd never flown here before, and he'd never actually flown this particular type of approach before. We'd briefed it. We thought we briefed what we needed to, and we came down and we went visual. We were able to see the runway. Now, my experience, what I would do is always, once I've gone visual, I would start to line up with the runway, and I'd start to line up with we have lights that help us get the precision of path. But he had been flying on instruments, very happy on instruments, and continued so. So at this point, I'm in a situation where I have to call this. I have to say, well, I'm not comfortable here, which I'm very open to do. And at the time, I gave him a hint, and I just sort of said, I'm visual with the terrain on the right. And that was just my way of saying to him, if you want to go right, you can. The approach is designed in such a way that you can. Anyway, we have certain markers along the way that we have to meet, and we met to the nearest degree those markers. So we were within the limits, but barely. So we got down, and this was the sort of thing I said, we'll write a report on it. Initially, the captain was like, well, there's no need. We were within the parameters, and I agreed, and I said, yeah, we were barely within it, but I think this is important for anybody else that wants to fly this to be aware that there's two ways to do this. So to give you an idea what happened, I put the report in. We talked about it, we put it in together, we composed it all. I ended up, I happened to be on an airport standby where we were just waiting around in case no one turns up. I ended up speaking to someone who was in safety, very kind, and he's a test pilot. He said, this is a very interesting one because there's nothing actually gone wrong here, but we'd like to know about this, and we'd like to disseminate this information. So what happened was, there's another chart which is called company and crew information, and now every time someone goes to Turkey with our company, there is a line in there that says, think about what you're going to do when you go visual and brief it. And it's a simple thing. I don't know if it's prevented any problems. I know for sure that there wouldn't have been a crash, but there probably would have been failed approaches. There would have definitely been go-arounds. So it's this sort of instance of incremental improvement that we're interested in. So we have a flight safety bulletin that goes around every month, and that was part of it, with an email for everyone to just a short note, going to Dalaman, think about what you would do on there. So in the system that I'm working in then, we're always analysing data. They're so hot on data for absolutely everything. As far as walking to the aircraft, there are studies where they're noticing how long it takes you to get to the aircraft. They want to know how long it takes you to prepare one part of it. And also, there'll be ways to prepare the cabin. And everything is down to the nearest minute. It's all data driven. The communication is essential. Communication between the pilots together. But more than that, the communication up to the company and then back down again to all the rest of the pilots. Slips and errors are caught because we are open, because we're able to say these things. And crucially, you're thanked, not blamed for that report. Genuinely, people come in and go, I didn't have to put that report in. It wasn't, nothing was fine. And I don't have the fear that I would feel unprofessional putting that in. I don't feel like oh, I did a bit of a dodgy one, but we got away with it. It was very much like, okay, we need to show these people what to do. And the focus is always on the system, and always on the system improvement. The need for reporting is essential. So that's my introduction from there. But what I would like to do is sort of ask people, rather than me try and guess what you're interested in talking about, I'd much prefer if we could have a discussion about what things might look like, and if there's any incidents you've been involved with. If you want it to be your best friend rather than you, that's absolutely fine. And we can just sort of talk about how it's dealt with.
So, talking about hierarchical structures, our leader wants to ask the first question, I think.
Okay.
James, thank you very much. It was an excellent talk. What I would like to ask you is, what feedback do you get when you submit an accident report or you submit any report? Because in the NHS, what we are often prompted to do is to submit a report where something has went wrong or when there was a possibility of harming the patient. We actually very, very rarely get feedback what happens and how is that actually managed. Sure. So I would just like to hear your thoughts on that. How is that done in aviation? Thank you.
Well, it's very standardized. We have, it's called SMS. Safety Management System is something that every airline has. It's a requirement. But what you mean is, how do I see it? What you mark when you do your report, what kind of severity you think that report has. Yeah, and then it's dealt with very quickly. If it's a low one, they'll say, okay, we've had a look at this. Yeah. For example, sometimes people are landing a very heavy aircraft, and you find the sink rate's quite low, just quite close to the ground. some people might be tempted to just pull back a little bit too much on the controls, just to sort of finesse that last bit. It's not part of the plan, and our aircraft that we're in calculates the rate at which you are rotating, and it decides if you carry on with that rate, the back of the aircraft's going to touch the ground, you get a tail strike. So it will call that out to you. We've never had that as yet, but we have the call quite frequently. So that would, I'd say that would be low severity, and I'd say within about 2 weeks, you'd get an email back, and it would say, you know, this has been ordered, this was the pitch that you got to, this was the rate at which that your pitch changed, no further investigation needed. But that has, of course, gone into the system. There's a statistic in there. If this continues to happen, we have a training system that is based around evidence, and that was fed into the training, and we then train differently how we make that maneuver. And everyone gets the feedback. Everyone was on that flight. Cabin crew, who you're sitting next to, we all get the same email, whatever it says on there. Yeah. No.
Thank you, James and Peter. That was really fantastic. One of the most striking aviation incidents recently, I thought, was the landing in river.
Sully.
It's a great film as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to know, I've got two questions really.
Yeah.
Firstly, there's a lot been spoken about artificial intelligence at the moment and algorithms.
Yes.
Do you think there's a role for AI in managing a crisis situation in aviation and in medicine that can set vital minutes or time in thinking about executing a particular process?
Yeah.
That's the first question is, how do you predict the psychology of a pilot that gone severe stress, or how do you maintain that?
Okay. I didn't hear the last bit.
I think the question is, how do you get back to flying after you've had an incident in the operating theatre or in the cockpit?
Sure. We have a peer support program, which is one thing. So there's an anonymous way of contacting someone who has nothing to do with you somewhere else, and you can chat about that. But we're very protected in a sense. We're less kind of traumatized when things go wrong because of the way we're able to talk about it and open up in the first place, I would say. If you made a mistake, and we talked initially, the importance here is you've made a mistake that's within your training, you've done it in good faith, and it's had a really bad outcome. You know, you are very protected in what we do. And I know people that have been in similar situations to this is what you're talking about. I know someone who had he had a malfunction in the aircraft before he took off, but he was allowed to go with it, and then it got much worse because he got airborne. This guy did develop some sort of PTSD. He then got a bit scared of getting in the aircraft. He went off work for a few weeks. He was just offered a great deal of support. He was given, I don't know the name of it. Do you know the therapy where you move your eyes backwards and forwards? That one. OMDA, is it? Thank you. Is that, is it?
You're in the wrong crowd for that.
No, I thought there was one. Anyway.
So the thank you.
So, yeah, I mean, they are protected to. You can handle. You get paid. You're on what's called a no-fly. You will be speaking to the right people. You can ask for more training, or you will be given more training, depending on what that is. But it's totally up to you.
So James, thank you for that. There's one other question that we've asked all our pilots, and we haven't had the chance to ask you.
Okay.
And this is a hypothetical question.
Yeah.
As a social scientist, if you were made a transplant consultant today, and you had to give advice to a more junior colleague who's about to do a pediatric transplant, from your experience, what 3 pieces of advice would you give them as they're about to scrub in?
I don't know. So have you met Peter? Seems to know what he's doing. I'd ask him what on that particular day was different. I'd say in this hospital, with these people, with this equipment, with this patient, tell me what's different. What's different to another day? I believe you don't have the benefit of the company crew information. So it would be something along the lines of, you know, on this particular thing, what's a common error? What's, or not a common error, but what sometimes goes wrong for this? And then always the next step, not what goes wrong, what are we going to do when that goes wrong? What's the next, the management of that threat? And hopefully getting to just sort of mentally brief what's going on. Because once you've thought about that, once you've rehearsed it in your mind before, the motor program, everything will kick in a lot better than if you hadn't said it.
So thanks. I think we can continue that over coffee. I guess the thing that I would personally really take away from Peter and James is medical error is really important. It's killing lots of people. And it's normal. I think we all tend to think it's other people who make mistakes, but actually we all make mistakes. It's a very, very normal thing. And I've certainly killed at least one patient through an error in the past. So I think it's normal to make mistakes. The question really is, as James was just saying at the end, how do we prevent those mistakes? And what do we do when those mistakes happen? I think in transplantation we're faced with medically and surgically very often with very stressful situations where we're very tired. There's lots of things going on. And it's an absolute recipe for disaster. So although it can be difficult in existing health systems to implement some of the things that they're doing in aviation without organizational change, we can each as individuals do something straight away. We can start by changing the culture from a blame culture to a just culture. And that's really good. So I'd like to thank Peter and James and indeed all the speakers this morning. It's been a really good session. Thank you very much.